Sportsbook, Monday WinBet. You can download the WinBet app today on the Apple Store or Google Play. Win with WinBet.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Cronin, and I'll be hosting a special live broadcast tonight on News Talk 760 WJR. We're going to be talking about the prevention of disease and the urgency of taking action before the onset of serious medical problems. Dr. Brian Collender, MD, internal medicine physician and specialist in prevention, is here tonight to tell you what you need to know about how to avoid heart attack and stroke altogether, and what you need to do to prevent Alzheimer's and many of the other chronic diseases. If you have a question, we're opening up the lines and taking your calls. So please make a note of this number, 800-859-0957. Again, that's 800-859-0957. We'll be repeating it throughout the show, and this is your chance to talk to the doctor directly. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back. You're listening to News Talk 760 WJR.
Okay, so we're live on Facebook on the stream, ready to jump into the
good.
show.
Great.
So what can we look forward to today, Dr. Collender?
Well, Anne-Marie asked me last week what changed, because I've definitely had a change in my opinion toward vaccination, who should get vaccinated, what the risks are. And maybe I didn't explain it well enough during the show last time, but we need to go back there again, I think, because we've talked about how I was worried that the government, let me not say worried, it's not the right word, now I'm worried, but I was hopeful that the government wasn't trying to intentionally screw us over, and now it looks like they have. You know, they've approved another vaccine than the one we're getting, and the vaccine that's been approved has a warning on it, and the one we're getting doesn't. Yet
So
it's
wait a minute, let me back you up there. What about the beginning of COVID, when everybody was going down to Ford Field and getting the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines? Were they okay? Or is it the second generation or this booster generation? What
You know,
all we switch here?
Well, things have changed. I mean, that was a year ago. You know, that was 6 months ago. This stuff changes every day. So to say, you know, what's happened, how can you really can't go back and say, well, how do I explain my suggestions back then? We were working with the best that we have. We were making recommendations based on, you know, the information we were given. And now it just isn't clear that the information we're being given is accurate.
We're back in about 15 seconds.
Again, I'd like to welcome all of you to a special medical radio show here on News Talk 760 WJR. I'm Anne-Marie Cronin, and we are here tonight to talk to you about prevention and why you have to start looking at healthcare from a different perspective. Dr. Brian Collender, MD, is joining us from Birmingham, Michigan, to give us some hard talk about dealing with our health and making sure we get the necessary testing. We're inviting you to call in if you have a question at 800-859-0957. Again, that's 800-859-0957. Dr. Collender, as usual, we start every show with what's going on with COVID. And the news of the week was that Beaumont Hospital was shutting down beds, and also they're up to capacity with COVID admissions. What's your advice?
Well, every story right now is being spun under the magnifying glass of non-vaccinated people. I mean, you mentioned yourself, we talk about this a lot on the Sunday show, which will air in a few days, that this whole thing is being presented as a result of people not being vaccinated. And it doesn't matter what you say or do on the news related to COVID, it's unvaccinated people are the reason or the problem. And that just really isn't fair, because even in that article, 30% of the people hospitalized have been vaccinated. So as the vaccinated population increases, there's going to be a higher percentage of vaccinated hospitalized people, just the nature.
Well, I guess we should take, Siobhan, you have a caller?
Yeah, we just had a caller come in. So let's go to Sharon in Ann Arbor. Sharon, what's your question?
Is is about blockage in the carotid artery. And my question is, if someone has been diagnosed with a blockage of up to, say, 65%, are there non-surgical ways to reduce the size of that blockage, say through diet or exercise? Is there a way to address this non-surgically?
Well, thanks for asking that question, Sharon. It's a great question. So for not just carotid artery disease, but even for coronary artery disease, even if it's somewhat severe, for stable angina is people who have symptoms from exercise that it's predictable. That's stable angina. Medical management is considered equal to surgery. So surgery means having a stent or bypass. So I would call it average medical management is equal to surgery. Optimal medical management is better. So 65% doesn't mean you have to have surgery. It means you've got an opportunity to heal your arteries, stop them from getting worse, quiet down the inflammation, and make yourself stroke proof. It's
what would
possible.
you recommend is her next step?
Well, the step is you need to get some imaging that identifies the layers of your artery wall. And we do that in our office. It's called the carotid intima media thickness test. And it measures the layers of the wall that you can identify and follow. So this is a number that you can follow year to year and assess the progress of a program that we apply. And that program would be personalized. So what I might do for you, Sharon, is something I would do different for Siobhan or for Anne Marie. So you've got to identify all of your individual drivers of inflammation and address them aggressively, because 65% is not far away from 80, in which case a surgeon's going to tell you to operate.
Yeah, she might be going in the wrong direction. But while we're talking about the CIMT, which is a very necessary test that you've talked about a lot, Siobhan actually had that test done at your office. Tell us about what the experience was like today having the CIMT.
Yeah, I mean, it was very calm and easy. You just get, it's basically an ultrasound around the neck. She went on one side and then went on the other and took some images, and it was like a spa day.
Without the massage.
Without the massage. But yeah, I mean, no pain, no discomfort. I mean,
no injections,
no
anything.
injections, no nothing. No, I mean, it was just like getting a simple ultrasound.
It's easy, and it is a simple ultrasound, not to be confused with a carotid Doppler, which a lot of listeners have had, and that's what listener Sharon just mentioned. She had her test done by a carotid Doppler. Carotid Doppler does not give you the information that you need to have to follow your progress like a CIMT.
Okay, can we fit in another caller before this segment? Okay, let's go to Steve now in Royal Oak. Steve, what's your question?
My question is this. I'm 72 years old. I have 2 types of cancer, stage 4. It's in a semi-remission state. I'm on chemo, okay, dry chemo, the pill. My question is this. Can I take a vaccination to defend myself because my immune system is severely depressed because of chemo? Can I take a vaccination?
Yes.
Against
You're someone
against COVID.
Absolutely, I understand. And so you should definitely get vaccinated because you're at high risk, given that you have 2 cancers and you're under treatment. Your immune system is not ideal, and you're a candidate for being vaccinated. And I'd even say you're a candidate for a booster when that time is optimal for you. And so right now that time is 8 months from the second vaccine dose, or 8 months from the first dose if you get a Johnson.
And literally you can get, they're all over the place. It's not hard to get.
No, it's not a question of availability. It's a question of, do you want it? So that's what's nice about being in America right now is you can get a vaccine. There's other countries around the world that they can't get a vaccine for the life of them.
Yeah, that's true. We're fortunate here that we've got all the vaccines available to us. And we ought to come back and talk a little bit more about the CIMT, because it is one of the most important tests that you are doing in your journey for prevention for your patients that are coming in. They really need to know more about it, don't you think?
It's absolutely the most important test that I do.
And everybody should be getting it. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cover that before we go on the break. So you're listening to a special live broadcast. We're here with Dr. Brian Collender, MD, talking about prevention. If you have a specific question and you would like to talk to the doctor directly about what you need to do to prevent catastrophic disease, please call us at 800-859-0957. Again, that's 800-859-0957. You're listening to News Talk 760 WJR.
Okay, so we're back on Facebook Live. We're on the air again at 7:19, so we've got about 3 minutes.
So
Okay.
we'll talk about prevention, which is our favorite Sunday topic.
I know, but I mean, I think, well, obviously the people that are listening in tonight, I mean, they really need to know about, there's still confusion about this Doppler. There's still confusion about the CIMT. And I think that you just need to make sure that everybody knows that they need to get that. That's kind of the starting point, right? That's where you're starting with everybody.
Disease identification is the starting point. So you need to identify whether you have the disease. And when you're talking about prevention, you're talking about preventing chronic illness like heart attack, stroke. And the reason we address those specifically is they are the #1 cause of death and disability, respectively, in our country and have been for decades. So the whole idea and the thought that people have that we've got great health care in this country and heart attack and stroke are #1 and 2 for death and disability, and I look at them as being completely preventable, is a shame. So those numbers have not changed ever, and they're going up worldwide. So worldwide statistics are increasing for heart attack and stroke. And I want to say that it's very, very possible, and not just possible in my practice, I expect people to not have a heart attack or stroke and not even to need surgery, a stent or anything to treat it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people think they're home free, that if they wind up going to the hospital and they get a stent, they kind of think this is being the magical cure. There's so many people with stents, and they say, well, I've got a stent, I've got 1 stent, I've got 2, I've got 3.
Well,
But that's not nearly the answer.
That's what their cardiologist tells them. You're cured.
Mm-hmm.
That's the messaging is, oh, you're got mission accomplished. That's the first words in my book. Coming back to, mission accomplished. The idea that if you've had a procedure to open up a 1/2-inch blockage in your artery, you're cured and they've done their job. Well, guess what? You have 60,000 miles of arteries in your body, all being subjected to the same negative forces that cause you to have a heart attack or stroke.
Yeah.
And they're not being addressed by that 1/2-inch stent.
Yeah, people they just don't realize how in what bad shape they are, and they really need to get on the bandwagon of getting this testing done.
And you can't assume you're okay. You can't assume just because you exercise, you eat healthy, or you do what you think you need to do, you look at your family history, you can make no assumptions that you're okay. You need to identify where you are and then act accordingly.
All right, back in 15.
If you're just now joining us, I'd like to let you know that we're welcoming you to our special medical radio show here on News Talk 760 WJR. We're back again with Dr. Brian Collender, MD, internal medicine physician and specialist in prevention in Birmingham, Michigan. He's here tonight to give us some hard advice on what we need to do to avoid heart attack and stroke altogether. And we're inviting listeners to call in with your questions at 800-859-0957. Again, that's 800-859-0957. Before we come back to callers, I'd like to also tell the listeners that we also, Dr. Collender has a Sunday show at 3 p.m. on Sunday, which, enlarges on all of the topics that we're talking about in healthcare today in America. Dr. Collender, let's continue on with your business's prevention and stopping people from getting into crises. What is the most important first step and first test that they should get?
People need to recognize that having a heart attack or stroke is not inevitable, but it's totally preventable. That's #1. And then #2, we talked about this, is that you need to identify the disease. And the disease is, do you make plaque? It's not about what's your cholesterol, what's your A1C. Those are all false initiatives, false goals. None of those numbers identify your risk. Treating those numbers don't ensure that you're okay, because half of the people out there, half of you listeners that are doing what your doctor told you to do still have heart attacks. So listening to your doctor, at your shrinking hospital doesn't mean you're going to be okay. It means you're probably screwed.
Why is cholesterol a bad measure of your overall health, or an insufficient measure, in other words?
Well, the number one marker that doctors use right now is LDL. So the whole healthcare system is built on lowering your LDL or evaluating your LDL along with some other basic data. Are you male? Are you diabetic? Smoking? There's a formula that gets plugged in. LDL is the biggest factor, and it puts out a percentage, a risk. And depending on where you fall in that risk, that formula advises a strength of statin dose that you should use. So depending on, and that's it. That's prevention in this healthcare industry. So even with this, this formula, if you read the United States Preventive Task Force on Prevention, it's uninterpretable. It's an uninterpretable formula. But despite that, heart attack and stroke is still the number one cause of death. So it is not working. So I think I don't even check cholesterols anymore in my practice. I don't need it. It's not the goal. The goal is identifying artery health and improving that. And that's what I look at. What's happening to the layers of your artery wall? And we look at that with the ultrasound that you had today. It's not about blockage. I don't care about blockage. All I care about is the health of your layers of your artery. Are we moving that needle?
So Siobhan had the test done today. When can she expect to get the results?
About a week.
In a week's time, what are you looking to see?
Well, we're going to look at two things. Number one is the total artery wall thickness. So each artery we look at, we have two carotid arteries. We'll look at your common carotid, right and left, the bulb, right and left. So the bulb is where your common carotid comes up from your heart, splits into an internal and external carotid. So we have two measurements in each of those three areas per side. So depending on, plaque is defined as thickness of the artery wall. And so once you achieve some threshold of thickness, then it's defined as plaque.
Okay, Siobhan, I guess you've got calls backing up.
So let's jump to the callers now. So we have Barbara on the line in Chesterfield. Barbara, what's your question?
Yes. A couple of months ago, I saw a Catholic priest ask a doctor, is it true or not? Is there components of aborted fetuses in that vaccine? And the doctor said yes. And I would like a comment on that. And also, there's also a lot of people that claim once they get the vaccine, a magnet will stick to the incision. I guess you call it the block, where the shot goes in, and it's magnetic. I mean, what the heck's going on? Please comment.
Okay, well, so nowadays, the way the vaccines are being manufactured do not involve any aborted fetuses. So it's, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, some of the research that was used to create DNA vaccines and RNA vaccines used some, fetal DNA and tissue, but that's not being used anymore. So what they learned from that was applied to, vaccine processing now. So there is no, human tissue being used of any kind. This is all being manufactured in a lab, sterilely, synthetically.
Yeah, it goes without saying that the hundreds of thousands and millions of vaccines that we have to put out through pharmaceutical companies, don't be worried about it.
So, a long time ago, the research that was used may have been from that source, but now I can 100% reassure you that the vaccine is not made from embryonic material. The second thing you asked about is there are no metals in that vaccine. So a magnet is not going to stick. Like I had a vaccine, I'm not attracted to any metal that I know of. So those are not issues. If anyone else has questions about vaccines, I'm in favor of getting vaccines if you are high risk. If you're 70 and over, if you're 50 and over, but also have a lot of comorbidities and you've got chronic illnesses, you should definitely get vaccinated. If you're over 70, you probably need a booster, but we can talk again about, what do you do for your kids that are under 30? I've changed my tune on that 100% in the last 2 weeks.
Okay, let's jump to the next caller. We have Gail in Toronto. Gail, what's your question?
Hi. I had an abscess on my upper jaw above my second molar and the other, so whatever it's called. And that was drained, but he didn't, I don't know, my cousin is my dentist. And then 2 years or 3 years afterwards, I had a heart attack. RCA was 70% blockage. So do you think abscesses and oral care and health is a factor to a heart disease or heart problems?
Well, first of all, welcome Toronto. I think you're our first Toronto caller, so it's nice to know the great voice reaches Toronto. Second is you are 100% right. Oral health does impact cardiac health. So there's a lot of research supporting that the bacteria in our mouths end up inside the plaque to build up in our artery, in our heart, and in our brain. So they're finding oral health bacteria in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease and growing inside the plaque of our arteries. So that's one of the things we do in our practice. So caller Sharon from the first segment, what do I do? One of the things that we do is look at the makeup, the genetic makeup of the bacteria in your mouth to see if you have bacteria that is related to cardiovascular and events and dementia and manage it. So even though I'm not a dentist, we use our dental expert team, are in our community to help us manage people who have these bacteria.
I think that's pretty remarkable. And I just want to say this before we have to get cut off and go to break, that the fact that you're doing that and that you're doing the oral examination when it's definitely been proved that the bacteria in your mouth can lead to Alzheimer's, heart attack, like 57 different diseases. And if you're doing this in your practice, and as you said, you're not even a doctor, but you're including this in your broad
I'm not
spectrum.
a dentist.
I mean,
He's
you're
a
not
doctor.
a dentist. I'm sorry. Sorry, you're not a dentist. But I
Right.
mean, I'm just saying it's amazing that as an MD, you're including this in the broad spectrum of your preventative care. I think that's pretty remarkable.
Well, the silos need to be broken. We'll go back to
Absolutely.
that.
Let's come back and talk about that on the other side of the break. Again, you're listening to a special live medical broadcast. If you have a specific question and you'd like to talk to the doctor directly about what you need to do to avoid heart attack and stroke, or if you have a question on any of the subjects we're discussing tonight, please give us a call at 800-859-0957. Again, that's 800-859-0957. You're listening to News Talk 760 WJR.
Okay, so we're back on Facebook Live.
It's a pleasure not to talk about COVID for a whole show. So this is our bread and butter. So great callers about oral health, and this lady from Toronto made the connection that I had a tooth abscess and a heart attack 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And even though dentists have understood the connection between oral health and chronic illness for decades, most of them are not making the connection to engage
The
a
patient,
prevention,
that's the point.
the patient,
Exactly.
or get help. So everyone thinks that their thing is the thing.
Mhm.
I've got the answer. If you fix this area that I'm in control of, then it's fixed. Well, I hate to tell you that it's not fixed. You still have to look at every other driver of disease. So
Mhm.
are you helping someone if you just manage their oral health and don't say, hey, you've got a ton of bacteria in your mouth that can cause all kinds of chronic illness? Maybe you got something else going on.
Mhm.
I mean, so for instance, today, we had a patient who came from the radio show and, just has been ignoring his diabetes for his whole life. And it was so bad that I really didn't address a lot of these other things. So even though today was like glory day, like his A1C normalized, I
Mhm.
mean, perfect, just I mean, you're coming in at 11. Now he's 5.8. I mean, his insulin resistance is gone. His inflammation markers, and this is what really, who cares about A1C? The labs that we use to measure artery health all improved. Did we stop today? No. What are we going to do? Go get a sleep study. Let's go see your dentist. We're not done. You got plaque. Let's keep looking for every other possible source of your disease. We didn't take a victory lap. We kind of did. We said, okay, finally, we can stop talking about your diabetes and let's move on to these other things. And so this is the problem with, well, all I do is this. So even though dentists understand they need to be, once they identify someone who's at risk, engage somebody else to go, all right.
I don't think any of them, by the way, I don't think any of the dentists that I've known or come across or discussed bring that subject up. They don't talk about that at all. They don't educate their patients to that. They don't tell patients that we need to take a look at what's going on inside your mouth because that bacteria can lead to serious disease.
Why do you think that's the case?
That's a good question.
I
Why?
know the answer. Well,
The
go ahead.
answer.
You answer it. You know the answer.
Well, I mean, the answer is it's not their business. They're not making money of it.
You got it.
Right. Thank you.
They're
oh my
not,
God.
You're welcome.
but that's
Gold star
horrible.
today. They're not making money being doctors.
You're absolutely right.
They're making more money putting in crowns and doing cosmetic work.
Right.
I'm going to hand this to you to see if you want to talk about this on the next
Okay.
Facebook Live, but I didn't want to bring it up.
Well, we can say someone thinks I'm lying, but
Okay.
it's okay.
Okay.
All right. Oh, we on the show? We're on Facebook Live still.
We're still on Facebook Live. When are we back, Siobhan?
33.
Oh, hi.
Was it a question from someone overseas? Welcome back to our special live medical broadcast on News Talk 760 WJR. We are fortunate to have Dr. Brian Collender, MD, internal medicine physician and specialist in prevention, here tonight to give us some straight talk about two important topics, prevention and being proactive. We're inviting you to call in with questions at 800-859-0957. Again, that's 800-859-0957. And in the interest of time, because sometimes we get backed up with callers here, if you don't get through, please feel free to call 866-COLLENDER. That's 866-KOLENDER. And you can follow up with the doctor directly. So coming back, Siobhan, do we have callers?
No, well, actually, yeah, we do. We just got one come in. So we have now Nancy in Oxford. Nancy, what's your question?
I was wondering, I recently had a heart cath, and it said that I had 40% blockage. But I have angina symptoms for off and on for the past couple of years. And I was wondering if it could be the carotids, because I noticed that I was traveling a couple of times, and I would be reading as we were driving, and I would have an angina attack. And I'm wondering if that could have something to do with the carotid artery.
Well, when you say angina, what does that mean? I'm going to ask you, what is that? What symptoms are you having?
I get pressure in my chest. I have had different symptoms. Once the last time I was looking down for several hours driving home. I wasn't driving, but I was driving home, and I had a pain that ran across my jaw, and I felt like I had water in my right ear. So they did do a heart cath after that, and they said it was only 40% blockage, so that wasn't it. But then shortly after the heart cath, I had a similar thing happen again. Again, I was looking down for a long period of time.
Well, a couple things going on there. Number one is you have blockage. You have plaque, which means you need to take a very aggressive preventive approach. Not just say, oh, you got plaque, but it's not enough to cause you symptoms or need a surgery. That's basically what you were told. You were screened for surgery. You were deemed not blocked enough to have surgery, and you're saying, goodbye, that's not our problem. The second issue is women tend to have more microvascular disease. So that means women get more artery block up in the arteries that a stent can't reach and the arteriograms can't see. So you need additional testing. Again, it's just blood work. It's not like you have to go get an MRI or some major PET scan. Although PET scans and MRI can help identify microvascular disease, there's blood work that measures that. And taking an aggressive preventive approach of all the things that we do, again, sleep, oral health, genetics, insulin resistance, vitamins, and all that can help improve your symptoms. But so that needs to be looked at from a cardiovascular point of view. And it never, again, the way we identify risk is by looking at the carotids, because you can see the layers of the artery very clearly there.
I'm just wondering about a patient like this. Why is she not being shepherded through the system? I mean, I feel as though she's just left to be out in the green out there with nobody shepherd. I know, right?
Well, but that's healthcare, which is, okay, you had a symptom warranting a cath, which, she really had angina symptoms, and they did the cath, and she has blockage, she has plaque, she has disease, but not enough to warrant a surgery. So they're not going to stent you or have a bypass unless you're 70% or more. So what do they do? Goodbye. That's not our problem. It's not your heart. Well, what are you going to do about the plaque that's built up that they found? Nothing. Come back. What they're basically told her is, come back when we can operate. What they don't tell you is you might die before then, because we're not going to do anything to stop your plaque from happening. So nothing's being done about that at all.
This is pathetic. This is absolutely pathetic that there are people like that out there that are just being left out to graze until they have another serious incident.
I think I want to sound like we're not hiding from anybody. We did get an angry response, so Siobhan, from our last caller, not this one, on Facebook. So I just wanted to let people know we're not hiding from, people trying to call us out, or me. Go ahead.
Would you like me to read with this?
Please.
So, we had a comment that came in based on one of the previous calls that came in. Someone here says, immortal cell lines from human fetal tissue is still used. They grow new cells from old, and no new fetus tissue is used, but it's human cell line, and once injected into your body, tries to kill it, but is now part of your body. Not sure I understand completely what he's saying. But
so that is accurate when it comes to stem cell studies. And not necessarily accurate when it comes to the vaccine. And apparently we are talking to someone who we didn't put their name out, but they're against vaccination. I would just hope, if you're going to take that stance of not wanting vaccines, that's your choice. Just make sure that you're taking care of your body in every possible way, so that if you get COVID, you're in best shape to prevent it and to fight it off.
Well, what's difficult here is, people are searching out and finding resources and articles that, perhaps maybe if you're not well versed in reading scientific articles or having the medical background, I imagine it could be confusing.
It's impossible. It's impossible. If you're a layperson and you're looking for trouble, you're going to find it. And it goes both ways. This is, again, healthcare is a bipartisan issue. I'm skeptical of the government, and I'm skeptical of people who are, I'm going to say, misinforming people who have ideas about the vaccine that are inaccurate. So I don't like any of this stuff.
This massive paranoia that's out there is ridiculous. And I think from now on, when you're going to be addressing some of these statements, I think we need to be asking these callers, where'd you get your PhD in biochemistry? Just so that we know that you're qualified to talk about this. Because otherwise, somebody who's calling in or who's sending a comment and that says, oh, yes, this is coming from human fetal tissue, whatever. There's, 1.5 million people listening to the show. They're listening all over the world.
Well, and again,
and that is just not true. And so, you know what, from now on, let's ask them, where did you get your PhD in biochemistry?
Well, the time on the show is valuable for us and for the listeners. So we don't really have time to entertain what I'm going to call just non-science. So I wanted to say that, look, we're not hiding from anybody, but at the same time, we don't have time to address nonsense. And so again, we're not, I'm just as skeptical and angry about the FDA as I am about someone putting out, nonsense. There's enough real things to be concerned about that are happening than to worry about that. Like, are you getting fetal tissue injected, or is there metal tracers being put in the vaccine? So there's enough real problems to be concerned about.
Like real problems, like as we discussed in the news today about Beaumont cutting down on their hospital beds and them being, they're all 8 hospitals running out of space to see COVID patients.
I mean, I worry about that. No one's talking about what's happening on the Versa website, which is a vaccine adverse event response site, where there's so many problems being reported about vaccine injuries that are just not being addressed by our government. So I don't know how many of those are real or not, but if you have questions about whether or not you should be vaccinated, you should be hearing from the government what the breakdown of those, of those remarks are.
Okay, I disagree with you 100%. The average listener has no access to the government, but I'll tell you who they do have access to. They have access to you. And you're an MD, you're a board certified MD. Not that I'm tooting your horn here, but I'm just saying, as a doctor, you are giving them your best advice on how they can continue to stay alive, not be on a ventilator. It doesn't matter what Fauci says. It doesn't matter what the government says. We have no access to the government. We can't control what the government does, but we can control good or bad advice. Well, hopefully good advice from a doctor who's trying to keep you alive.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said.
Well,
Indeed it is.
No, this is really, I feel sorry for the listeners out there. I feel sorry for the number of people who are stuck in their houses, and it's just a real shame. In the meantime, we'll have to take a quick break. You are listening to a special live broadcast from the studios of Startup Nation in downtown Birmingham. If you have a specific question on the subject we're discussing tonight, and you'd like to talk to the doctor directly, please call us at 800-859-0957. Again, that number is 800-859-0957. You're listening to News Talk 760 WJR.
Okay, so we're back on Facebook Live going into our final segment. We have about 4 minutes.
All right, well,
who
well
cares?
said. Well, but what?
That's true.
I know, but when you say who cares, it's not right. But when you put it the way you just put it, which was as eloquent as you've ever put who
but
cares.
That's how she is. There's like the onion layers.
Right. Well, we had to get there. It took like 2 years.
No, it didn't.
To get down to the nugget of this is what you've been trying to say through.
No, I mean, it's
cares?
like it doesn't matter what Fauci said. It doesn't matter what the government says. It doesn't matter. What matters is you have to have somebody tell you this is what you need to do. And your best shot is you're telling everybody get a vaccine. Forget about all the rest of these stories.
But we're not anymore. But they're not stories. There's legitimate questions and concerns about what the FDA is doing, how they're acting. There are concerns about reports of complications and side effects for the vaccine. You can't ignore those.
Well, there's a bigger side effect, and that's that you die in a ventilator.
Well,
how about that?
But not really. Now, it's not a one-size-fits-all, get a vaccine and be shamed into it, which is what the media is telling us to do and the government's telling us to do. You need to personalize it. So most of the show is how our healthcare system is broken and how can all these things be happening and you can't prevent, how come I can prevent heart attacks and no one else can? You can't say that the healthcare system's totally screwed up, except for me. But when it comes to the vaccine, they nailed it. Because they're the same problems ingrained in the infrastructure are affecting the vaccine administration. So it's not all perfect. They're ignoring a lot of important information just to sell vaccines.
But they're not selling them. They're free.
They're
selling them to the government.
The
That's
government
fine.
bought them, and now the government's selling what they bought.
Mm-hmm.
So that's and you've got all of media locked in on it. So it's not that simple of just say, well, go get a vaccine. If you got a vaccine, great. But now, if you're under 30, you really got to reconsider whether you should get a vaccine or not. You know, I mean, you did it and it's over. All right, you're fine. You didn't get a side effect. But if you haven't been vaccinated and now the FDA puts a black box warning on some alternate vaccine that was approved but no one can get, but it's exactly the same as the Pfizer, but one causes myocarditis in people under 30, but the one that you got is exactly the same but doesn't? Well, how can you say it's emergency use and good to go and its twin isn't?
But no one has any control over that, so it doesn't
But
matter.
you have to make the best decision that you can based on what you know. And if the government is intentionally playing a shell game,
Mm-hmm.
then how do you have the information to make a decision?
Mm-hmm.
When people are reporting bad outcomes from a vaccine and the government is not addressing the problem, you know, how do you know, how do you make the decision of what to do for yourself?
We should be back on at 47, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
We'll be. We do have a caller on the line now, by the way.
This is the final section. Welcome back to the final segment of our special live broadcast here on News Talk 760 WJR on the importance of being proactive and informed of the resources available to prevent and treat the chronic and debilitating diseases we've come to accept as inevitable. You're listening to the expert advice of Dr. Brian Collender, MD, internal medicine physician and specialist in prevention. If you have a question for the doctor, now is your chance to call us at 800-859-0957. Again, that's 800-859-0957. Since we're at the last segment, Siobhan, I'll pass it over to you. You've got a caller?
Yeah, so we have David on the line in Windsor. David, what's your question?
Yes, the question is for Dr. whatever's last name is.
Collender, get it. Learn it.
Yeah.
Learn it well.
Anyway, here in Canada, they're about to implement the vaccine passports everywhere you go. Otherwise, you won't be allowed to go anywhere. What is the point of that if you're not really sure of how you're going to react to the vaccine, and how is your body going to react to it? And because many people have different body mechanisms, because if we had the same body mechanism, it would all be no challenge at all. Not everybody can tolerate the shots.
Well, I'm gonna start to answer your question. So we just were talking about this during our Facebook Live segment off the air, and the problem with the mandate is that the mandate was given power by the FDA approving Comirnaty, which is the twin to the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The problem I have, which changed my whole feeling about the vaccines, period, is that the Comirnaty vaccine has a black box warning, yet the Pfizer-BioNTech that still has emergency use approval, despite an approved version available, although it's not really available, that one is free to use and safe and can be used under emergency use without any repercussions to the company or whoever's prescribing it. So really, there's a black box warning on this Pfizer vaccine, yet they mandated vaccines based on the approval. It's like a shell game, and that's a real problem for me. And I don't know why feel like I watch the news and no one's talking about this. To me, this is a huge cover-up and intentional misdirection by the FDA and the government to confuse us. And I have a real problem with this. And now they're approving the mandate because of that approval, the FDA approval of another vaccine that has a black box warning, but it's okay because you can't get it. You can get this other one. I mean, it blows my mind that this is a, I don't want to get conspiratorial, but this is a control move by the government, very shady. And so this is where I go off on, and you really got to reconsider who should get a vaccine. It should be handled on an individual basis. No business mandating a vaccine that if you're under 30 can cause myocarditis.
Well, I have a solution to all of the above. So I'm just here to tell you that people cannot do anything about the government. They cannot. I said this on the last segment. But what they can do is go to their doctor and talk to their doctor about it. And they need to go to a doctor like you who has that broad spectrum of vision as to how they can handle their overall health.
But I can't do anything about the government either. And I can't agree with someone who's got concerns about a vaccine and tell them, oh, don't do it. And they're going to lose their job, lose their ability to travel.
But you're not telling them not to do it. You're an advocate for vaccine.
I am under circumstances now because now I'm not sure why they approved a vaccine that has a black box warning, but the sister version of it is available under emergency use. It doesn't make sense to me. So now I'm not sure someone under 30 anymore should get a vaccine when there's a real risk of myocarditis. It says so on the warning of the vaccine they approved.
What is it that changes at 30 that risk is
It's
diminished?
really 40, but I'm lowering it to 30
Okay.
in my and on the air. They
Okay.
say it's under 40. So, and the reality is, if you're under 40 or even under 50, your risk of dying from COVID is minuscule, and I mean minuscule. If you're over 70 or have comorbidities, all the things we talk about, the people call on the show, you need to get vaccinated because you got other issues that impair your immune system and impair your ability to fight off illness. So you should get vaccinated. And
So,
what I
okay.
worry about is the people that don't know that they're sick. The people walking around with never, have decent cholesterol, they're not under any treatment, they have insulin resistance, they're time bombs that have no idea. They're the ones that are, that's a gap there of people that don't know.
Well, then there's the answer. So obviously, all the people that are out there that are wondering, should they get vaccinated? Should they not get vaccinated? They need to get in with a doctor like yourself who's going to take a deep look at what's going on in their system, whether or not they have these pre-existing conditions, comorbidities, inflammation, whatever. Because they may not know from their ordinary PCP that they've been going to see once a year, once every 5 years.
And I agree with you, which is you need to know a lot more about your health to make this kind of decision, especially now. Now, whether or not you want to, be stuck in the U.S. working or not working because you're choosing or not choosing to get vaccinated, that's your choice. But I can help identify your risk of having an adverse event from COVID. Like you say, I really had nobody in the practice have a problem because they're walking the walk.
All right.
Okay, we just had a caller come through. Let's try and get him in before the end. We have Dennis from Rochester on the line. Dennis, what's your question?
Yeah, it's not so much a question as it is a comment. That the problem with trust, right? And we've been taught to trust our doctors, and I do. I trust my primary care physician, but then this whole thing became political, and you had doctors in consultation with their patient, and they say, well, you know what? I'll give you hydroxychloroquine, I'll give you ivermectin, I'll give you bunacidide, whatever. But then you had politicos trying to get these board-certified, credentialed doctors fired from their job. And it's like, since when can the governor of the state of Michigan turn to Lara and say, you know what, if you're a doctor and you prescribe hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, I want the pharmacist to rat you out, and we're going to go after your licensure. I mean, this is why nobody trusts anybody anymore. Because
Collins?
it's thanks for calling. It's a real shame, and this is again, that's a whole other show. We could spend a show on the media takeover of all this. And, I know that happened a while ago. And again, so when my patients get sick, I ask them to get a swab to prove they have COVID. And once you have COVID, then you can have these prescriptions done. But you cannot write for those drugs for somebody that does not actively have COVID. And I don't have a problem with that. That I actually do not have a problem. I don't want to give those drugs to someone that I do not know for sure has it. So actually, that's okay with me.
So that's your, when somebody suspects they have COVID and they call you and come to your practice, the first thing you're doing
Get
is
tested.
getting tested, find out whether or not they're positive. If
Well,
they're positive,
I want to know what I'm treating all day. That's the same thing. I want to know what I'm treating. I want to treat the right thing.
but also let's come back to the beginning of the story. People need to get attached to a doctor like yourself that's going to take a deep dive and see what's going on with your health in general and who specializes in prevention. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'd like to quickly thank Dr. Brian Collender, MD, specialist in prevention, for being here tonight and for being willing to share his expertise and knowledge with regards to not only the prevention of disease, but also on the importance of being proactive and engaging with the practice that provides access to the necessary testing. This show is brought to you by Collender Medical. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cronin. We hope you got some useful information tonight on how to be your own advocate. Take charge of your health, whatever your medical journey. Please continue to tune in to our shows Thursday at 7, Sunday at 3 p.m. for the latest medical updates. And thanks for listening to News Talk 760 WJR.
By the way, I didn't want to